But my goal is always to get done by 6:30, so I ask everybody to keep it moving. It's my great pleasure to introduce everybody to Jonathan Kaufman, who has been sitting here, attending the board for a while and applied for the open position. I'm coming to realize I'm probably the person with the least amount of education on the board now. Jonathan graduated out of Stony Brook down in Long Island, where I was a week or so ago. He's embarrassed all of us by making summary notes from the Cape Coastal Conference that are the most detailed and thorough notes we've ever seen. So I'm sure that your input will be valuable. He has a strong background in geology, subsurface things that few of us know about, and I think it's fair to say you're probably a recognized expert in your field, even though you're retired out. So welcome aboard.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm always amazed by who shows up in Falmouth and wants to serve on a town committee. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, first item on our agenda we're going to pass over because I have not had a chance to make a synopsis of the meeting I went to down on Long Island, Stony Brook. I will briefly say that it was not a conference as to applied or field feedback. It was much more focused on people working in their labs, looking at various things in a laboratory scale or experimental scale. So I'll try to get that together and distribute to everyone before then. Next up on the agenda is an update from Steve Layton, who is our board's appointee to the urine diversion working group meeting. You guys were online earlier today.
Yes, we had our second meeting. It's a very good group. It's chaired by Peter Johnson-Staub, the assistant town manager. The two contractors at the Mass Test Center are Brian Horsley and Brian Baumgartel, and Sarah Wigginton from something in the county, and myself from this committee, and Kim Comart from the new Fresh Ponds Committee, who's right there, who can give an alternate version of this if you wish. Basically we're still waiting for DEP to say what the requirements are, in my personal opinion, that's kind of sad how long that has taken, and will probably continue to take, given that we supposedly have an August 30th deadline to get people signed up, but we shall see. We've been working on the contract for the volunteer agreement that would be the contract between the volunteers to put urine diverting devices in their house and the town, and that's led to long discussions of matters of principle, such as how many of their fixtures they will have to convert. And so stay tuned.
Next item on the agenda is a discussion and possible recommendation to the town's manager's office on IA subsidies.
Still have to operate the screen.
I have to click?
Yeah, you can do.
I gotta go up or down?
You can do right or left. Right moves forward.
Okay.
Steve, may I just make a segue into what you're about to say? The part of the reason for this is that Peter Johnson-Staub asked this committee to do this as a guide for what the subsidy might be for urine diversion toilets.
Yep. So some of us might think of subsidies as being the third rail of anything we do. I think there's some order and structure to it. So I'm going to start off just, giving a little background of the Mara Vista area sewer, the costs and the subsidies that accrued within that last development that was done. So the working rule is that the town assessment of 70% of the sewer cost to the property owner. So therefore, when we started that project, the estimated assessments were $19,000. We didn't want to underestimate the assessments and then have people say, you told me a number, why is it $3,000 higher? So the actual assessments when we were done was $13,000, and that will never happen anyplace else again in the town based upon density and the length of the sewer systems that have to go in. But if you work your way backwards and do the math, it means that each of the property owners got a subsidy of approximately $5,571. There are other costs that are connected with the project. The average cost to connect a gravity sewer based upon numbers gathered up by the wastewater department was $5,300. That's the excavation and the landscaping. And the average cost to connect an E1 low-pressure sewer was a little more at $7,100. And currently, the annual usage fee runs between $400 and $450, obviously. The less water you use, the lower it is. The more water you use, it goes up. There is no relief or discount if you irrigate your lawn. You still have to pay the sewer fee on it. So, where are we at now? We're in the design phase for the TASA sewers. The previous cost estimate, based on 809 sewer equivalent units, are called SEUs. That's how to account for, some places have multiple units or whatever, was done back in $26. At that time, the estimated betterment cost was $35,735. We're in design. We'll have a better number later. That number could go up some, that number could go down some, but it's a number worth using for this discussion today. So again, using the 70-30 rule, that means the subsidy amount from the town for the sewers for this area would be about $15,315. I arbitrarily assumed the connection cost to be 20% higher. I have no justification for that other than people are still digging, people are still doing landscaping. The folks I know that have landscapers haven't said, I can't afford them anymore, their cost is twice as high. So just raising the previous numbers, it's assumed the sewer connection will be $6,360. The cost of connecting one low-pressure sewer is assumed to run around $8,500. And there's not been any change to the sewer usage fee over the last couple of reassessments of fees and rates. And for the time being, until I hear otherwise, I'm going to just assume it stays relatively level. So, what are the costs and the subsidies to go from a Title V to an IA system? One of the things is people in this room have various times thrown out, it costs this, it costs that. There's not a lot of data yet on Cape Cod to go to. But one of the things I picked up when I was down in Long Island a week or so ago was the fact that in Suffolk County, they have done over 5,000 installations of IAs so far. And they have an average cost to do the conversion of $28,000, not including landscaping. So for discussion purposes tonight, I'm just going to assume the cost in Falmouth to do a conversion is about $35,000. Again, not including landscaping. Mass tax credit currently offers 60% of the design and construction up to a max of $18,000. If you go through the math, that tax credit is approximately a 50% subsidy from the state through the tax credit. Annual operating costs will be for sampling an O&M contract, $400 to $600 a year to the homeowner. And not everybody does this, but it's good practice to pump out your septic tank every 3 years. It costs about $450 or $150 per year. So, let's move to the IA subsidy equity question. First off, not all property owners have a $4,000 annual state tax obligation. Because if you divide the state tax credit back over the numbers of years, that would work out to $4,000 maximum you could do in any 1 year, which means you would have to have a taxable income of $80,000. The pre-tax income would probably have to be well over $100,000 in order for you to be able to get that maximum benefit. So, the question is, should there be a town subsidy for IA conversions as well? So let's make the assumption, and we'll get to the first one of these in a little while, that the town is going to create geoboundaries for parcels that must install an IA, and under the watershed permit, we'll get a maximum of 20 years to do that. And then assuming that there will be as many as 4,000 affected homeowners, and hypothesizing that a $10,000 subsidy is equivalent to an annual cost over 20 years of $2 million, that would work out to a 28% subsidy to homeowners who are in a geo-boundary and are told they have to convert over to an IA. Now, clearly, the town would have to make a commitment, there would have to be an appropriation, and a lot of things, but this is an exercise for discussion. Let's move on. How about a subsidy and an equity to conduct a UD pilot program? So I start from the pilot participants are assumed to be in a future designated IA geoboundary. That is, they're within a nitrogen-sensitive zone. But the participants cannot access the mass tax credit, as technology is not yet approved by DEP as either an IA or a Title V system. If UD gets approved by DEP, it's a reasonable assumption is that the homeowners within the geo-boundary who are directed to convert and who choose urine diversion would be eligible to utilize the mass tax credit. Okay, a while back, Kim, you passed me along a summary of what you thought the cost might be for a Worcester EcoFlush toilet. And to that, I did a little checking with a few people, a couple of people that dig and do other things. And my number is a little higher than the number you started with, Kim, but it's a working number for.
And is this tank installation in the basement or in the yard? Is it?
Haven't just.
Because it's very different.
It's different, but I didn't try to do every permutation and combination.
Yeah.
So, working now, it looks like the cost for one toilet might be in the $11,450 range. Cost for two toilets might be $14,400. I didn't try to add the other money on if you do a third toilet. So, it's been floated around that $10,000 should be a subsidy for those who participate in the study phase. Then, looking at the previous numbers, participants in the study would be getting an 87% subsidy if they had one toilet. And for two UDs in a household, they would be getting a 69% subsidy. And for UDs installed after DE approval, the tax credit would cover 60% of the costs. So the annual cost for the UD is involved with hauling away the urine, as well as pumping in the septic tank every 3 years. Septic people show up, septic hauler's not going to be much different from a urine hauler. Again, could pick a higher or low number, but I just carried the $400 to $450 a year. So, I don't have a hard recommendation there. I'll go back over and sit down as needed. I can scroll back and forth if we need to get back to things, but we need to begin wrestling with a recommendation on subsidies. Jonathan, you're the new one. Do you want to go first, or you want to get up to speed?
I'll pass to Steve.
Okay. Then we'll start at this end.
I just wondered if you have this all as a spreadsheet somewhere, and if you do, could you circulate it so we could?
I do.
Steve has been wrestling around with a spreadsheet, and he can circulate it.
This is a benevolent case of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. I thought I was supposed to be doing this at the same time. What I'm about to say is not in any way contradictory to what Steve did. It's just a different way of presenting it. Kristen, if you could put up the first slide. The numbers on mine, I know, and I submit also on Steve's, don't actually matter, the absolute values. It's just relative terms. And I'm not trying to compare. This isn't a shopping comparison of why you should get one technology and not the other one. It's just the way things are. So there are 4 technologies: replacing the Title V with another Title V because it failed, going to a sewer, a traditional IA, or a UD. And I'm talking long-term, I'm not talking a pilot project. And these numbers were all from Brian Baumgartel this afternoon at that meeting. We're assuming, and some of them are from Kristen, and there are a few blanks. $20K for a Title V, I thought it was higher. $30K for a sewer, 40K for a traditional IA. And by the way, that sewer is in a dense area. If you priced it in the same area where you would put a traditional IA, it would be more than 40K. And maybe 10K for a UD or 14K, as Steve said, it depends on other things. The O&M, I wasn't able to get in time for the sewer. I have no idea what it would be for the UD, but it's small compared to the capital costs. Then, is it a choice for the homeowner? Title V is the existing default. The sewer is not a choice. If you're in a sewer area, you have to get a sewer. The traditional IA and the UD, assuming that they're approved, is a choice between those two. If you're in a nitrogen-sensitive area that's not to be sewered, you have your choice of either of those. According to Brian, the tax credit is a yes for the first three and likely for UD, and the same for the low-interest loan. So I like those two lines, especially because they tell me it's a wash. It doesn't matter to your decision-making as to what any subsidy should be. And then the subsidy. There's zero subsidy for an existing Title V. You're just obeying the law. You don't get paid to do it. The reason traditionally there's been a betterment for a sewer, and the reason it's called a betterment is because nitrogen collection aside, the idea was you're no longer burdened with the cost of Title V. You can pour anything down it as long as you don't tell Amy. and it may increase the value of your property.
Right.
And it also lets you, in some cases, put more rooms in your house. And the town is paying you to remove nitrogen. In the other two, the town is also paying you to remove nitrogen, but strictly speaking, it's not a betterment, it's a worsement, because you still have to maintain your Title V, all those costs. Despite an editorial in the Enterprise a couple of weeks ago, UD does not get rid of the leach field. And you have the additional costs of the monitoring and so on of the traditional IA and the UD. So if you go to the second slide.
It's too easy.
For sewers, IAs, and UDs, the town is paying for the removal of nitrogen that benefits the whole town. Should it be somewhat in proportion to the amount removed? I don't mean exactly that somebody reads a meter and pays you for it, but in our thoughts. And also, I would submit that it should not be more for more expensive systems, such as IAs, than for, let's say, a cheaper system, such as a UD, because that reduces the incentive for the homeowner to save the town money. And I already said the note. That's all I have to say. The rest is up to the thoughts of everybody.
Ed?
Hey, you skipped Ken?
Well, Ken started, and he passed the baton, I
Oh,
thought.
he's passing the buck. Okay. Couple of things on the tax credit. Understand that the tax credit is not for the betterment. It is solely for the hookup. If you put in a sewer, the state tax law, when I utilized it a few years back, and I took advantage of the state tax credit, specifically states it is not for the betterment. It is only for the cost of your hookup and demolishing of the old system as mandated by Board of Health and town rules. So that, you have to pull that out of any detailed cost analysis, which I understand you did not do a breakdown. But as you look at that cost and call it a subsidy because it's coming from a state tax credit, both of your PowerPoints, by the way, are excellent and very educational. I mean, the detail and the thought that went into putting these together is terrific. Just going to urine diversion for a second. One of the things I've been thinking about it, even though, you know, I'm not deep into the weeds on it right now, is no matter how you do urine diversion, whether it's with a cubie or with a fixed toilet in one bathroom, 2, 3, or 4 bathrooms, a key problem is getting rid of that urine. Who is going to pay, and should the town support in some way, the collection of that urine and the eventual, hopefully, reuse? So it's not going to the wastewater treatment plant anywhere. It is being reutilized as possibly a commercially viable and self-supporting resource. And that was the hope, I know, of certainly the Green Center people, I think Kim and some of the others as they initially looked at this, but it may be potentially a self-sustaining from cost of collection. However, in the interim, I think a key task for the Mass Tech and the group that's working to coordinate that is develop a robust plan and actual costs for that collection. Where's it going to go? Who's going to haul it? And is there a realistic reuse path? So that's, my thoughts on that one. As we look at what Steve Layton started off with, and there's so much information. One of the things I've been trying to find out is what are other towns in the area doing? From what I've gathered, they're not subsidizing the IAs. Understand, too, a point that in Falmouth, there's over 200 IAs already installed. Some of those, in West Falmouth in particular, and I'm fuzzy on the details, were subsidized through a grant program from the Buzzards Bay Coalition. The town did not subsidize them. Other people that are mandated under current Board of Health or Concom regs to put in an IA are not and have not historically been subsidized. So as we look at the fairness issue going forward, gee, suddenly anybody we mandate now is going to get a subsidy, but you folks that out of the goodness of your heart for the environment maybe put one in, or because you were mandated by a town board, put one in, you got nothing. That's a real fairness issue in my mind. Historically, the 70-30 split was developed in Falmouth, call it subsidy of sewering, at New Silver Beach. When that mini plant was put in and the homeowners in that area were in a crisis mode. Houses were unusable, unsaleable, because they had raw sewage bubbling up out of the ground. And the town came up with a great concept to do a mini treatment plant, worked out things and said, okay, look, this really is kind of just a neighborhood problem, but we recognize it's a public health issue, everything else. We will subsidize it to the tune of 30% from town tax revenues. When Woods Hole and Main Street, parts of it and parts of Scranton were sewered many years ago at a much lower cost, but I think the precedent is important, the town subsidy percentage was much higher. I think it was something more like 60%, and homeowners paid 40%, and I'd have to go back in my ancient file. Go ahead.
But all of that got 90 cents on the dollar from the federal government.
Correct.
Okay, so-
Understand, it was more heavily subsidized by federal money. In fact, way back when the town could have gotten the sewer put in for nothing and totally paid for by the federal government. We lost that opportunity, it's gone so. But, understand that the split, historic 70-30, is not a 100-year-old or a 50-year-old thing. It just goes back to New Silver Beach. Those are some of my thoughts on this, but I think, we've got some great starting points. We've got a real dilemma here of what to do. Just reading over some old articles from, earlier this year on the Vineyard Times, Tisbury and one other town on the Vineyard got into a program and did offer subsidies with some ARPA funds that were left over to people putting in a Title V. Significant subsidies to the tune of, I think it was as much as $35,000. They only had, at that point when the article was written, 2 of the people that were impacted by the mandate that took advantage of it. And they were very perplexed. Why aren't people taking this, call it a gift? Because there's 1,500 homes on the Vineyard that are under a mandate by the towns to put in IAs. Mashpee has an IA mandate. I don't know of any subsidy that they're doing outside of working with them to get low interest or zero interest loans. So for Falmouth, this would be, I think, a new direction to take, and obviously requires a lot of thought, deliberation by a whole bunch of folks, starting here, because I think the town fathers are looking for a suggestion, recommendation from this board going forward as to what makes sense with IAs and also possibly urine diversion. So I've said a lot, I'm done.
Do you want to say more, Steve? John?
I would only comment that I think the subsidies are something we should work toward. I mean, using the analogy of Little Pond, where the town, there's a real advantage if we have a management entity that's managing a whole watershed that has IAs, that we put out the competitive bid for the technologies we're going to be using, so that whoever is responsible for the maintenance and monitoring is not going to be doing it on X number of systems. They're going to be relatively few systems. So by analogy with Little Pond, we put out to bid the low pressure pumps and the town paid for those. So I could have certainly imagined that if we have areas where we're going to use IAs, that the town might subsidy substantially the hardware other than the normal Title V hardware that is the actual IA hardware. And that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to do and a way to get some uniformity in what we're trying to do and manage.
You're up, Tom.
I want to throw a little bit of a curveball into the discussion and think about a situation where a homeowner is allowed to retain a conventional toilet to deal with fecal waste, and then the only expense is collecting the urine and doing whatever they want to with it, and they can put it on their lawn, their garden. Then the conversion is essentially zero. A lot of people in town are doing this already. So then the cost of the conversion is, for all intents and purposes, zero. And that would be the path of least resistance, which, as I said, people are doing already.
Okay. No, I'm trying to, maybe I don't understand your point. Let me backtrack a little. Part of it is we move forward. We're going to wind up working in conjunction with the Board of Health.
Right.
We're going to, next up is to talk about Megantic Harbor. Where are we going to draw some lines and say, the town is going to tell you, you shall do something,
Right.
okay? What people choose to do has to meet certain other requirements.
Exactly.
Right. To the extent they choose to go down a certain way, yeah, if somebody wants to, you know, I'm still not certain if cubies are allowed under the state plumbing code. How's that? But
It doesn't have to be a cubie, it could be a bucket or a bottle.
I hear that.
Simplify this.
I hear that. Let me just,
Yeah,
I know
go
you're
ahead.
anxious.
So the goal is to lower the amount of nitrogen that's being let into the groundwater. And IAs are going to be monitored perhaps every 3 months, right, quarterly. And you're there at the distribution box and someone fails to meet the 10 milligrams per liter standard, you can say, all right, you have 2 months to fix this, whether they go back to putting all of their urine where they're supposed to put it. I mean, it's going to be very easy to follow up on and say to somebody, you know, if you can't fix this in 3 months, you're going to be thrown out of your house.
I want to backtrack just a little bit. In Mara Vista,
Yeah,
town elected to build sewers there. And the homeowners were told, you will connect. They didn't have a choice of not connecting.
right.
We did, I'm going to set aside the whole compost toilet
Right.
exercise. If you put a compost toilet in, you could be excused out. The Tassa sewer, people aren't going to have a choice of hooking to the sewer or not.
but-
No, just,
go ahead.
when we start defining geo-boundaries,
Right.
we're going to be saying, you shall put in an IA system. We're not going to tell them, you shall put in a UD system.
Right.
I don't think we can direct them to put in a UD system.
No,
can
we
only
can't direct
put
them
in
to
an
it, but if you're a homeowner and want to pick the path of least disruptive, least economically constrained thing, and someone says, if you'll do it this way and you'll have your D-box monitored every 3 months, why wouldn't we offer that to people?
That may be a choice.
Right, I'm just saying, it may be that you're mandated to lower your input into the groundwater to a certain level, not mandate the technology to get to that stage.
Technology's got to be a technology acceptable to the DEP.
Right, that's gonna be the issue, and it's gonna be a big issue going forward.
All right, Steve has been very anxious to
Yes.
straighten us out.
I think I can simplify this and save a lot of time. This discussion is not about urine diversion. It's not for urine diversion or against urine diversion. It's not about urine diversion.
Right,
Peter Johnson Staub asked us what we recommended as a subsidy for IAs, traditional IAs.
right.
So that he and the rest of the urine diversion liaison group could put their heads together and maybe start thinking about urine diversion, which is a long ways away.
Right, but my
And
point is, you
and
may not
it
need a
brings up-
subsidy.
It brings up complicated cases like you just quite validly mentioned. But this discussion will become incredibly cluttered if we keep going off into urine diversion. This is about IAs.
Right, but what if the state accepts UDs as IAs, although now we see that they're going the other way now?
Well,
I don't know.
It's not the question we were asked to answer.
Right.
Jonathan?
Well, I don't want to go down the UD, rabbit hole again, but
No, they've already mined it for you.
how do you quantify the amount of nitrogen that's being removed unless you say 100% of the urine collection is done and nobody sneaks off to use a toilet somewhere? Because isn't the nitrogen credits that you're going to get a critical part of this, meeting that mandated TMDL?
So on a conventional IA system, it has to be monitored 4 times a year at the D-box. So you'll know the concentration of nitrogen that's going to the leaching field, that's going to the ground. The amount removed is less important sometimes than the amount going to the ground
Right.
at the end of the day. The state, for example, says the concentration of nitrogen in the wastewater coming out of your house is 35 milligrams per liter. We've heard over and over and over and over again in here that the concentration of nitrogen coming out of people's homes now is in the 60 to 70 milligrams per liter range. And, that's validated through a lot of things. The state, though, uses the 35, okay? So we take water records, we use the 35, we say this is what we get for sewers. We might get a bigger, we might get a smaller. The proof comes in the pudding when we're doing water quality monitoring, okay? But, on urine diversion, much like the sewer, we don't actually measure what we pull away. We're using some values from the DEP, but then at the end of the day, it's what's actually getting back into the groundwater. On a sewer, nothing gets back in the groundwater. On an IA, it's going back out currently at 16 or 18. We're trying to get down to 10, okay? If I can circle around a little bit, part of the way I put my presentation together was to an underlying question that's been rattling around for quite a while, which people have said when the urine diversion proposal came up, and I'm back on urine diversion, people that participate should get $10,000 for participating. And the question's been, is that a reasonable number for somebody or not? And I tried to cover the fact that the 50 participants we get aren't going to be eligible for the state credits, the state tax credits. And that when we look at their cost of doing it and what $10,000 would mean towards their costs versus what people who get the tax credits wind up with costs, it kind of starts to look like a little bit of a balance. So as I did this exercise, brought it in for presentation, I didn't go 10,000 is a crazy number, they should get 5. 10,000 is a crazy number, they should get 15. 10,000 seemed like a reasonable point for those participants. So that's part of where I got to. I didn't want to try to pin down if people who actually got mandated to put IAs in did or didn't get a subsidy, but I tried to lay out the parameters that what discussion would go down the road in the future. And that's why when I used my what the percentage subsidies, Steve, that's why I was looking at, I also would hypothesize that if the town's going to give subsidies, it's not an infinite subsidy. And we'll get to Mara Vista watershed very shortly here, but if in the Mara Vista watershed, and presuming that the state somehow or other comes up with systems that make 10, not the 18 we're seeing now, there's a certain number of homes that would have to be IAs. If they can't get to the 10, it's a bigger number. But at least initially, you can say there's a number that has to put IAs in. And the sooner people do it, the better. So to some extent, developing a subsidy for early IA participants gets us to a solution faster. But if you want to wait 20 years before you put your IA in, the subsidies are probably gone. So, if the board's got more things, otherwise I'll open it up to the audience for comments or questions. No, you're closest, go ahead. Ladies first.
I'm Maggie McGaw. I live in Wacoit. Three things spring to mind in relation to this conversation. One is the tremendous urgency that everyone here recognizes. I've been to enough of these meetings to see that you all feel that urgency. I would just suggest that you recommend to the town to offer the best subsidy, at least the best subsidy that has previously been offered to other residents in comparable situations. And this idea of specifically providing a subsidy to early adopters, I think is a really great idea. I think it's, anything that gets people moving and begins to normalize this idea that we're all moving in the direction of something in the nitrogen-sensitive zones is a good thing. And, I know this is not supposed to be a conversation about UD, but since it has been raised, I'm just going to say, we've been using QBs for over a year now in our house, and I don't want to stay on that system. I mean, I know I could do that forever, but I'm getting a little weary of interacting with the household urine on a weekly basis. I would like to be able to install fixtures in my house and a tank in my yard. And, I had my barrel pumped out 3 weeks ago, I guess, by the Wasted Company, called up on a Monday morning and, requested service. And on Wednesday, the truck with a very nice driver pulled up and they charged me $100 for that. That was so easy.
Was that an annual volume or was that a half?
That was like 55, actually it was more like, it was a barrel and a half. So it was somewhere around 80 gallons.
How long did it take you to collect it?
Well, we had already collected another barrel as part of the pilot.
I'm just trying to get to that.
I know, but I would
say, that's fine.
I'd say in the year, we probably diverted, what would that be, 130 gallons. My impression from the guy who came was that it was a per stop charge and not a per volume charge. Yep. And I do think, they're taking it, the last thing he said to me is, I'm taking your nitrogen off the Cape. It's like, yes. And then they're going to sell it. They are going to turn it into revenue. And then my final plea is about new construction. So I'm in the Wacoit watershed. There are projects slated for construction, and they're planning, I was speaking with someone yesterday, they're planning on putting in Title V. It's like, it seems that the time has really come for the town to mandate that IA be installed in construction commencing January 1, 2025. So anything that this committee can do to push that forward, it makes no sense to have somebody build a new house with Title V and knowing that in 5 years down the road, they're going to have to spend another $40,000 or whatever. So those are my points.
The next presentation is going to be about McGansett. And this board is starting off on presentations to go over the 14 estuaries and what we're calling geozones, which will define areas that IAs, the minimum area that we know IAs have to be in. The area might get bigger depending upon how fast technology gets to 10 from the 18. But we're going to be working, we have later on we're designating people. The Board of Health has to interact with this board because the Board of Health ultimately would have to adopt the geozones. We're going to work on our way through this, getting to the selectmen in the early fall, mid-fall, and getting everything in place as we march into the new year. So if somebody's putting up a new house inside a geozone, once we get them all defined and adopted, they're obligated. Okay?
That will be great.
So we're not picking out new construction, although it's kind of, it's the eyesore that you're seeing, like, why? But we're trying to cover this for the bigger piece.
Good evening, Matt Hanley from West Falmouth. I really feel that IA systems not being fast-tracked has really been one of the biggest losses in the town of Falmouth. The Board of Health, previous to this new state regulations, was looking at fast-tracking IA systems for a town meeting like 2 years ago. Obviously, the new state regulations put a big wrench in the works and kind of threw it in the wastewater quality management committee's lap here. But we're here talking about subsidies, and it's the topic of wastewater is very complicated. I've been following it since 2009, and I've attended a lot of the meetings, and so, when people are watching this at home, it's going to be a little confusing. And it looks like sewers, to compare apples to apples, like the sewer number's a little off. It's like you're talking about original installation numbers, not the cost of the sewer over the lifetime. I think that the plant upgrades in like the last 10 years has been well over $100 million. That's being paid for by the taxpayer. So when you really add all the cost and maintenance of all the systems, the playing field is pretty level besides urine diversion. Urine diversion takes some of the fixtures and maintenance costs out. Obviously, you have your transportation costs. Pieces of information that a normal person in Falmouth wouldn't know is that the town of Falmouth sewage plant hauls off like 2 to 4 tanker trucks of sludge a day. I think it's like, and each one of those tanker trunks is 8,000 gallons to be treated at another plant where it's dried and dealt with. So, you can look at urine diversion and hauling that material off, but even our plant needs to have material hauled off. So it's, we can point our finger and say, well, this is an issue, but, it's really a level playing field. As far as subsidies, I don't know how many people on the board have read the settlement agreement between Buzzards Bay Coalition, Mass DEP, and the town of Falmouth.
Which one?
The 2012 agreement.
Okay, there's a couple of them. I just want to know which
Yeah,
one
the
you're talking about.
2012 agreement calls out that there's a nitrogen offset plan that the town of Falmouth and Mass DEP agreed to. And under that agreement, the town of Falmouth has contributed to the Buzzards Bay Coalition subsidies in the past. And from my talks with the Buzzards Bay Coalition, if we go forward with this new expansion of beds 14 and 15, because that treated nitrogen, the effluent being discharged at 14 and 15 may be impacting North Falmouth, under that, there's going to have to be another settlement agreement with Mass DEP, Buzzards Bay Coalition, and under that,
Stay on the.
well,
the
what I'm
topic of
saying is that
subsidies.
the town of Falmouth likely is going to have to do a nitrogen offset subsidy in North Falmouth as well in that watershed if the TMDL is exceeded. And we would have to do another round of subsidies to West Falmouth for them to install IA systems. So that subsidy by the Buzzards Bay Coalition is $10,000 for these people to encourage installation of IA systems, traditional IA systems in West Falmouth watershed. Now that West Falmouth watershed extends past West Falmouth. On someone that hasn't been following this would say, well, that's the people around the harbor. No, that watershed carries all the way into Hatchville. And I think there's like 10 units that have been subsidized just in like the Hatchville section, and the rest of those have been clustered around the West Falmouth harbor. So the town of Falmouth, whether they like it or not, has been subsidizing IA systems in West Falmouth with great success. The Buzzards Bay Coalition has taken the reins, and they've helped homeowners get involved in the program. They help with the permitting, they help with the design, and then they're doing the monitoring. So we already have a tried and true process, basically a pilot program that we could build off with confidence, because the Buzzards Bay Coalition is very professional and they've collected great data. Now, a $10,000 subsidy would be huge in improving water quality in this town. It would fast track improvements. Like, I've been, and everything trickles down. But, the sewer in Falmouth, at the earliest, even if 2025 we get approved, there's going to be a holdback for litigation with the Buzzards Bay Coalition and possibly my family. So that's going to be 2 years. And then you're going to start construction, that's another 2 years. So at the earliest, the sewers in Falmouth are going to get, this next phase is going to be 2027. But if we can get the subsidies and the IA regulations figured out by the town meeting, the same town meeting, then that would have immediate construction implications and would start the pathway into improving water quality across all of Falmouth around our fresh water and salt water. Thank you.
I'm going to summarize. You're in favor of subsidies.
Yes. We're paying for it one way or another.
Earl. If you sit behind Matt, I can barely see you.
Earl Barnhart, Green Center. Tom Duncan had an excellent statement where he said that the urine diversion, done it with simple equipment, is the least change for the homeowner, least change to the house, least change to the landscape, least disruption of the people's lives, and the least cost, probably because of the lower costs of all the equipment. The best investment Falmouth could make is to subsidize that kind of a solution, because it has a lot of advantages for the homeowner, and it has a good removal of nitrogen. Now the goal, again, according to Tom Duncan, is to keep nitrogen out of the groundwater. That's the goal. You have to keep going back to that. And I think you should have a system where right now IAs are monitored quarterly at the concentration of the effluent coming out of the septic tank. The very same method should be used to monitor the effectiveness of the urine diversion in a house. You should measure the concentration of the effluent coming out of the septic tank. And you have to do it by pounds. You can't do it by concentration. Concentration means nothing. If a house uses very little water...
We use the water records for each parcel along with the concentration to get to pounds.
Okay, you'd have to do that also for the urine diverted houses.
Yeah, the same. We've been hypothesizing the same.
Good, thank you.
Monitoring. Are you suggesting that subsidies should only be provided to people that do urine diversion and not for regular IAs?
No, I'm saying that would be the most effective use of money.
So are you suggesting that subsidy money goes first to people that do urine diversion, and if there's any money left over, it goes to regular IAs?
No, I'm not saying any of those things.
Because I'm sitting here as a town person, I'm not going to disagree with your statement that it might be highly effective, but I don't know that we can necessarily direct money to one technology over another at this point.
Well, no, if you have IAs, you have a subsidy for IAs. If you have UD, you have a subsidy for UD. How people choose, or where you put them, that's a different matter altogether.
Yeah, all right. Anybody else want to talk to subsidies? All right.
Can I comment? On the comments from the audience.
Sure. I'm just looking at the time. I want to make sure we get to the real thing we got tonight, which is Mara Vista.
I will attempt to be brief, as difficult as it can be for me. I think
Against it, not Mara Vista.
the comments from the public are important. They're saying something that I know Buzzards Bay Coalition has been saying, I've been saying, and many, many others in town. We're overdue to have an IA mandate plan. Part of what Maggie, I believe, said was there's new construction going on and being planned right now where people are just going to put in a Title V, even though it's in an area that's an impaired watershed. The only time they'll have to do an IA, if I understand the regs, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, is if it's right near the water and an impaired body. So if they're within 100 feet of it, they have to put in an IA. They are currently mandated.
No, only if they need a if you don't need a variance, there's no sort of.
You're not asking for extra flow.
Not asking extra flow.
You're asking-
If you're next to a water body,
Nope, water bodies
and
don't.
you have a cesspool you're going to replace with a new system because you're redoing the house,
Right now,
you don't have to do an IA.
right now.
So there is no.
Unless you need to get variances and waivers because you don't have enough setback or a large enough reserve area or whatever else. Now you're in front of the Board of Health asking for a waiver, and the Board of Health can say, well, in exchange for giving you a waiver, we want better treatment.
Okay. So, that's how, I'm going to say primitive and backwards we are as a town versus Mashpee, Tisbury, Wareham, Marion. They all have regs going in to mandate. A big difference between them is the triggers. New construction. God, it's awful to think somebody's going to probably be spending $1 million plus after they've spent a couple of million on the land and going to put in a Title V versus an IA that might cost them an extra $20,000, $40,000.
Again,
But
stay with me. So I'm just gonna, that person's building it right now. They should be very aware that the town's about to create geozones.
Right.
And they might be told within the next 5 to 10 years, they've got to take that system they just put in the ground and make it an IA. Now, I happen to know that at least 2 of the engineers that design septic systems in town are laying out the systems in such a way that converting them to be an IA is going to be very easy. They're not going to be hydraulically at the wrong elevations.
That's actually mandated by the Board of Health.
Is that mandated now? I knew you were talking about it, yeah.
put space for it.
That
Well, it's
has to-
hydraulic, it all has to flow downhill, so you
Yep.
don't want to find that you can't get
Yep,
the
you
flow.
have to have the room and but, I can't emphasize enough, and I think our audience members, people who have come to many of these meetings are saying, we got to move quick on this. It's ludicrous to continue to allow people to put in Title V
Yep.
without defining the regs what our triggers will be, whether it's new construction, increased flow, or all
I
that.
want to get Kristen up from Megansett, because we're going to tackle Megansett.
Yep.
We're going to get into the details of what it means for the first of estuary watershed, okay?
Yep.
And it's going to be the structure and format for how we're going to do all the others. And again, working with the Board of Health, participating. Plan is to have a joint meeting of the Board of Health sometime, once we've got through all 14 estuaries, and then make sure that everybody in town selectmen and managers understand where we're, as 2 boards we are at, and then get into adopting.
Quick suggestion.
Right, I want to get to the Megansett.
Yes,
Okay,
that's it.
go.
I suggest that we drop this discussion for now, that we think hard about it. No one had a chance to see your presentation or mine until this meeting.
Right.
And discuss it next time. Peter Johnson's son doesn't need an official vote
That's fine.
this week.
I wasn't going to get it. Tom?
Steve,
Yeah,
can
Tom
I
had his
just
hand
come
up.
back
Tom had his hand up.
to my initial,
Tom had his hand up. Tom, I'll get back to you.
And I agree completely with Steve. The point of the discussion was to focus on the subsidy. And the thing that we haven't brought up here is setting the subsidy as some percentage of documented costs, instead of having a flat subsidy. And I just would like to keep that in mind going forward.
Thank you.
And I'm done.
yeah, along the same lines as what Tom said, you presented a lot of sort of complex calculations as to what the subsidies would be under various scenarios. if you have an underlying spreadsheet where you've calculated that, it would help me understand what we're talking about. The bedrock principle to me needs to be that we treat everyone the same regardless of what they do.
Yep, we'll distribute this. My apologies for being overloaded with too many things and working up to the last minute today to have this ready. Other people on the board have brought things in at the last minute too, though, so I'm not going to beat up on myself today. I want to hand the, Kristen's been working with GIS. We've seen over the last year a couple of different things about different estuaries. We were recently looking at, from a watershed perspective, a little bit. Watershed permits, the what-ifs for some of the more complicated things. What we're going to do tonight is cover one of the cleanest watersheds in terms of being able to understand what we've got. The important thing for everybody who's watching or listening or participating is Kristen has worked with the presumption that the DEP's goal of getting systems that will reliably make 10 milligrams per liter or less will come to fruition. We're not there yet. There's a couple of them in the provisional status. So as you look at this tonight, whoever you are, however you're looking at this, we're going to look tonight at specific parcels that we know will have to put IAs in. There might be more parcels that have to put IA in when we get down the road. But these are, I forget, you had a phrase for a while, like, I always hate phrases like critical or whatever.
I had priority areas.
But she's done enough work and she's gonna make a good presentation, but we need to walk away understanding that the parcels we're looking at are gonna be designated to put an IA in. There might be more, but these ones will be in.
But they're not yet.
They're
Don't
not yet.
scare anybody
They're not
yet.
We haven't gone to the Board of Health. But again, the Board of Health at one point was looking at 100 feet or 300 feet. And the more we've looked at it, it's, for every estuary, it's not 300 or 100. Those aren't the magic numbers. Some estuaries, it's a bigger range of numbers. Some of them are a smaller range. So we're being very specific, not just a sweeping regulation.
Kristen, before you start, could you point out Megansett Harbor, Squatigue Harbor, and the canal to us on there?
Absolutely. So this main basin here, this is the main basin for Megansett Harbor. The channel is right in here, and this is Squatigue Harbor. So those three sub-embayments, all of this that's highlighted in blue feeds into those three sub-embayments. So that's the extent of the watershed. The dotted line here, that's the town boundary. So we're south of it.
This is a shared watershed with the town of Bourne. We're not making any decisions for the town of Bourne. We will have to structure an intermunicipal agreement with them where they take responsibility for their percentage of the nitrogen.
So Steve said it's one of the cleanest estuaries. That doesn't make it one of the simplest estuaries for several reasons. But we'll talk about that. So Steve just said that it's primarily a shared watershed between Falmouth and Bourne. When the Cape Cod Commission was working on the 208 plan, they have an appendix somewhere that says 61% of the watershed is in Falmouth. That's geographically, that's not a load allocation. There has not been a load allocation done that says Falmouth contributes 61% of the load to Megansett or any of the individual sub-embayments. So that's a piece of the puzzle that's actually missing.
At the town boundary?
In the watershed as a whole,
61%.
according to Cape Cod Commission's database, there's about 1,069 total parcels. That includes what's in Bourne, that's not just Falmouth. 790 of those are single-family residents. Looking at the build-out that's occurred from the Falmouth Assessor database, the Massachusetts Estuaries Report was finalized in 2013, and looking at the assessor's data, there have been 21 parcels that have been listed as year built. So that means from 2013 through 2023. That means it was a vacant lot that now has been built. That doesn't count for any parcels that have had changes in use or increases in water flows. Those aren't as easily captured in the assessor data. Buzzards Bay Coalition is the entity who primarily monitors Megansett. They compile their Bay Health Index scores, which is based on a bunch of different criteria, not just nitrogen. But for Megansett Harbor, which includes the channel, it's rated as 80%, so it's in their good category as far as healthy. Squetique, however, is 61%, and they consider that to be fair. So when going through this exercise, excuse me, I considered multiple sources for information for mapping out where the proposed geozone would be. First and foremost, looking at the MEP report and then the TMDL report. So the TMDL report is what the town has to abide by. For Megansett, the TMDL report is pretty much a carbon copy of the MEP. That's true for about 90% of the watersheds, but it's always good to make sure. Also looking at Buzzards Bay Coalition's data for the entire system and the individual sub-embayments. The Cape Cod Commission has their multivariate planning tool, which has an updated database of all the individual parcels. It includes water use. It's different water use from the MEP. It includes a couple of more recent years, the most recent being 2013, 2014, 2015. And they have a slightly different way for calculating the nitrogen loading to an embayment and reductions. For this exercise, I was only looking at the potential of IA nitrogen reductions. I wasn't including the potential credits for stormwater and fertilizer BMPs. I also did not look at shellfish because we've had the discussions that where the shellfish are make a difference. Fertilizer and stormwater credits are kind of a little bit like mythological creatures. So looking at the tangible reductions that could be achieved. So these are the numbers from the MEP. It's broken into the 3 sub-embayments. And I took the Cape Cod Commission 61%. Again, that's not an allocation, but it's the only thing I have to work with right now. So 61% of the nitrogen reduction required from the present MEP numbers gets you about 900 kilograms. That's the build-out numbers over there. So up until 2023, Megansett had been meeting its threshold nitrogen concentration at the Sentinel Station for at least 5 years. 2023 data, which was just released a couple weeks ago, shows that it was slightly above the threshold concentration. It was at 0.37, and the threshold is 0.35. So we're still in the ballpark, but you can't say that it's meeting it anymore. Looking at the Cape Cod Commission database, they say that there is a present nitrogen load reduction requirement only in Megansett Channel of 773 kilograms. So the MEP says 62 would be Falmouth's portion. Cape Cod Commission says everything else is doing okay except for 773 kilograms in the channel. So this is what the Cape Cod Commission's MVP tool looks like. When you log in and start a scenario, it breaks out the sub-watersheds. Again, this is Megansett, the main portion. Cedar Lake feeds into there. This little skinny portion, that's Megansett Channel. So that's what the Cape Cod Commission thinks 773 kilograms needs to come from. And all of this is Squetique up here. So
Where's the town boundary?
it's the dotted gray dashed line right here. Right in there. The way the commission has it set up is you can put in different implementations and it'll calculate how far you are to making your TMDL. So it's saying Megansett Harbor and Squetique Harbor are 100% of the way there, that no additional nitrogen reductions need to be done. But it's saying Megansett Channel needs it. Again, we abide by the TMDL and the MEP report, but you have to take into consideration the data that's around you too. So,
Question?
Go ahead.
So it's intriguing because although the Megantic Channel is in Falmouth, right?
Most of it.
Much of the watershed is not in Falmouth. So any regulatory changes, how to, again, that, I guess Steve alluded to that, there's going to have to be some kind of agreement.
Yes. And this, because it's a shared watershed, there has to be basically the nitrogen load allocation, like what GHD did for Wacoit Bay. Because just because the land mass is there doesn't mean there's actual contributions from the land if it's not developed. So that needs to be looked into further.
Do you have any clue how that breaks out?
No.
Okay.
But Bourne, I do believe, did not file to do watershed permits. So they are under the default.
Really?
Yeah. So they're under the default that any new or upgraded construction or change of ownership and all that other stuff.
Well, that's gonna
I
be
think they still have a week and a half to file.
But to help you out, this might be one of only one or possibly two nitrogen-sensitive zones in Bourne. So if you look at the way that watershed's working, people on Scraggy Neck have to upgrade as they sell the property or do new
Yeah.
construction.
Well, we don't feel too much sympathy for them.
It's also easy,
I'm not gonna comment on anybody.
It's a different way of getting there.
They just chose not to do it. They just chose not to do the watershed plans.
it's also easy to believe that the build-out ratio could be very different in the two different towns for all kinds of economic and political reasons.
Yeah.
Well,
In other words, it may be Bourne could build out 5 times what they've got now, and we could only build out 10%.
This is the details of doing the intermunicipal agreement, like if there's a trigger in there or not, okay?
All
Keep
right.
going.
So, back to how you calculate what your nitrogen removal will be. We know it's water use. That's how the MEP model was done, and when you're trying to come up with numbers that you want to submit to the state, it has to be done in a consistent manner. So, looking at the MEP, when they did the model, they used individual water use for all of the parcels, and it was worked out across, but they also have the average water use for a single-family residence. So for MEP, for that entire watershed, this isn't townwide, this is just for Megansett. MEP was 154 gallons per day. The updated data, the water use data from the MVP, from the Cape Cod Commission, is 141 gallons per day. So to be the most conservative you can be, you'd want to use the lower water use because that's less nitrogen you would potentially be removing if it's based on water use. So as Steve said at the beginning, I did all the calculations based on the state's target of an IA performing at 10. So using the lower water use and 10 milligrams per liter, the average single-family residence would remove 2.85 kilograms of nitrogen per year. So if you look at the MEP numbers, again, this is the Falmouth portion, 61%. That's what it equates to if you divide that by the 2.85. How many single-family homes in each of those 3 sub-embayments would need to be upgraded to meet the MEP numbers? If we look at the Cape Cod Commission data, again, because Buzzards Bay Coalition data shows that the main harbor is pretty much meeting its threshold, so it doesn't need 252 systems to get there. And that's part of all of the adaptive management. If we look at what Cape Cod Commission is saying, and they say 773 kilograms from the channel, that would be 272 systems within that small sub-embayment. Again, we don't have the formal allocation of what the actual loading requirements between the two towns would be. So, looking at the watershed, obviously homes, the closer you are to the surface water, the sooner you're going to see an impact. So, looking specifically at this area, this is more than the 300-foot boundary. What this is the proposed IA district. So this encompasses 136 total parcels within here. The breakdown of what they are, 85 single family, a couple multifamily. The parcels that are highlighted in blue are not developable. The ones that have the blue dot are vacant but can be developed. There are 2 IAs in there currently.
Lucky them.
So if you take that MEP, the water use number, the 141 gallons, and it comes out to 2.85 kilograms per single-family house, that comes out to be about 242 kilograms for these 85 single-family homes. If you remember, the MEP said Falmouth was responsible for 62 kilograms in Megansett Channel. So this is Channel. Right here, this blue line, that's Squatigue. So not much of Squatigue is in our boundaries. So that would be exceeding what the MEP says for that sub-embayment, but it's not there for the Cape Cod Commission where they say 773 kilograms. But if we look at the water use from the Cape Cod Commission database to match it back to what Cape Cod Commission is saying, the water use for all of these parcels here is about 482 kilograms of what Cape Cod Commission says needs to be removed, which works out to be about 62% of that load removal. So we're back to around the 61%. And the parcels in Squatigue would be another 34 kilograms, according to the Cape Cod Commission numbers. So while the main harbor itself is meeting its threshold, obviously any implementations here, you're going to see some benefits in the main harbor, but the Megansett is unique in that both Fiddler's Cove and Rand's Canal contribute to the main harbor. So as we move along and look at what needs to be done in both of those, any improvements in those surface waters are going to have an impact in the main harbor itself. Also, Cedar Lake, if you go back to this one, Cedar Lake has a 46% outflow into Megansett. So as we look at Cedar Lake as a means for Rand's Canal, that also is going to have an impact in the main harbor. So it's not that we're saying there's nothing that needs to be done in the main harbor. Again, it's the adaptive management. But looking at the neighboring watersheds, there is going to be some impact there as well.
So if we do Cedar Lake, does that mean the new Freshwater Ponds Committee has to take us out to dinner?
Maybe.
Thank you, Kristen. So just come back to the little colored map if you can.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said it in the introduction walking in, from Megansett Harbor, this would be, those areas in blue would be the initial geo-boundary that we would want to take to the Board of Health and discuss for this watershed, okay? It's not an arbitrary 100 feet and not arbitrary 300. It's an analysis looking at the various things. Kristen's done both Rands and Fiddlers already. We wanted to focus on just this one today so that everyone can understand the process by what we're going through. And then keep picking these off.
So one thing this doesn't take into consideration, because it's a broader discussion, is what you do about additional growth within the watershed.
I was going to ask that question.
So.
Because some of those are fairly large tracts. It looks like they could be.
Mm-hmm. And the watershed extends beyond here.
Right, so the load could be increased. So you didn't do this as a build-out analysis?
Not do this as build-out. So, and again, because.
But again, that's back to, again, my early statement, Ken, which is, we know this will have to be done. To the extent that over the next 5 or 10 years, because we've got to keep coming back to these every 5 years, we say, oh, look, suddenly there's a lot of pressure over here, this changed. Now we're going to have to pick up another 40 homes upstream of there, okay?
But the other challenge for doing build-out for Megansett is it's meeting its threshold concentration right now. So doing any of this, it's still going to meet its threshold concentration because there's not that much build-out that would cover.
But it'll improve water quality inside the channel.
Correct.
And improve water quality. Because, I mean, I get stuck every once in a while. The threshold concentration is not some magic. You always want to be below that number.
Yes.
You know, the more you're below that number, the better the water quality is going to be.
Yes.
The minute you trip over that number, you know that you're impairing water quality and things aren't good. But the more you can push that number down, the better the water quality is going to be. And I've articulated more than once, our goal is not necessarily to meet TMDL. Our goal is to improve water quality in the estuaries. Ken?
I'm just going to say, I like this approach a lot better than just an arbitrary 300-foot or any 100-foot limit, especially if you considered, for example, if there were a court challenge, you would now have something to back up why you're requesting what you're requesting, so.
Good point, thank you, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna swing to the other side. I'm gonna put Jonathan on the spot, all new stuff.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is it looks like a great example for the Barnstable SUP. We have a geographically concentrated set of homes that are going to go to potentially this system. You want to negotiate with the most degree of power possible to get the lowest cost possible. It just seems like a perfect use of their, skills.
Good, all right. You've got your hand up, Steve?
Well, he just took 2/3 of the words out of my mouth.
Nice guy.
I totally agree with what Jonathan just said, and recall the last meeting, they came, they admitted they were vendors under cross-examination. And that we didn't have to use them, but that they
I
wanted.
didn't know we were in a court of law.
And I think we should ask them for a quote as soon as possible. Because it's going to take them years to get their act going.
We got a lot in front of us. But the goal right now is to get through the 14 estuaries, get these defined, work with the Board of Health. Then the next step would be how to implement.
But they're the county.
Okay.
You can treat them like dirt.
Okay.
They're not commercial people that you have to be fair to. All it is a phone call, say, we heard you. I'm sorry, I went over.
Yeah, you're off topic a little bit.
No, but you just call them and say, we enjoyed your presentation. You say you want to help us out. You say we pay you, and that you'll take care of the management of this. Please send us a quote. How much work is that?
You gonna do it?
Sure.
What are you gonna ask?
What I just said.
What are they quoting on?
Managing IAs in this area.
But we haven't.
They have to give us a proposal. It's up to them. It's
But we
open-ended.
haven't yet defined this, or have buy-in and agreement from multiple people. So you're asking for a proposal on something that's not been agreed to.
It's an example. They're so far from getting their act together that they need something like that to light a fire under them to get real.
So I'll ask for your patience, because I think we might have a better thing to ask them for an SUP on as we move along. Okay?
Because every time I hear about IAs here, somebody says, oh, it's so expensive, we don't have the people of the Board of Health to manage it. No one ever says, well, what's it going to cost the town to hire more people for Board of Health? Here you have a willing vendor in the county that says they want to do this, they're looking for something to do. Say, that's great, what will it cost?
Okay. I'm gonna step away from the SUP. I'm gonna stay on the geo-boundary for now. We can circle back to that in the future. Tom?
I really like this approach. I don't have any criticisms, any critique right now. I'm pleased.
John?
Yeah, the only point I would make is that we're now, and I agree, this is the way we want to do this, it's not unlike what we did in New Silver Beach. The Board of Health went out there, George and I and the rest of them, we walked around and said, all right, we think this boundary is where we need. We went to town meeting and they designated that a sewer service area. And then we mandated how we were going to deal with it. And I think that's the direction we're heading in here, is that the state has mandated that we remove a certain amount of nitrogen from an area. We do an analysis, we decide that we can meet that standard by treating this many homes, and I think that's where we need to go. The other point I would make is that this now, and I'm just going to pull a number out of my head, this is now 100 individual little sewer plants. And the town is going to be responsible to DEP manage those. And that's where we're thinking of getting the help from this responsible management entity to help us do that. The Board of Health cannot individually manage 100 IA systems, as we keep going from harbor to harbor. So I think this is the right, this is dictating what we think physically we've got to do to meet the standard that DEP has set for us. And the second discussion is going to be then, okay, if we do this, how are we going to manage it and how are we going to pay for it?
Ed?
I would say this, I think it's an excellent approach. It's great study and analysis. And we've got 13 more to go. If we do one every 2 weeks, there goes this year. I would suggest that we consider concurrently, while we look at the magnitude, watershed by watershed, of what this is going to mean, that we look at what is the what. What mandate, time frame, triggers that we will agree on and say, look, here's how many houses are going to be affected by this. Here are the triggers, new construction, whatever, transfer of ownership. There's a whole list of them, so that we're not in next January saying, okay, now let's talk about what we're going to do with this number.
We will get there before January. We had 3 of these ready to go today. But Kristen and I decided we would do this one so everybody can understand it.
Illustrative.
The next couple, we're not going to need to have her sit there and go through, the
I'm
county
gonna do
has
it the
this.
same way.
Everybody has all of that. We're going to be able to jump right to the first couple of maps showing the watersheds and then to the geo-boundaries and some explanation of why the boundaries exist and what they're doing, okay?
I guess then the only question I have is about the build-out analysis and whether it needs to be at least thought about. This is the current geo-boundary. It could grow to be this big.
I think that some of the watersheds have more development potential than others, and maybe in those areas, we should take a hard look at what needs to be done. I mean, if you look up there, what you're seeing on there are, the undeveloped parcels are not predominant, right?
Well, there's a few, it's hard to know.
That's just what's right at the surface water.
Yeah, it's hard to know because you don't know what the restrictions are on any particular parcel.
My point is, if you looked up at that and there were a lot more undeveloped parcels up there, then it maybe begs to go to the next level.
Yeah.
Okay?
And that maybe
Okay.
says for new construction, it's an IA mandate
With the
for
con-
that
Well,
watershed.
that would be one way to deal with it. It would certainly, you still have additional load, but it would be
Right.
much reduced.
with
The other thing is, of course, we're using 10 milligrams per liter. And-
Because if it don't get there, the boundary gets bigger. But every 5 years.
No, I'm thinking the other way. I'm thinking that, these.
It goes below 10.
Nitro systems do better than 10.
Well,
And that's great for the estuary, but as far as what the state
Right,
says
you're
when
probably
you
never gonna
submit
get
the
it
report.
accepted as the,
Right.
right.
with the concurrence of this board, it doesn't need a formal vote, but I would want to pass this on to the Board of Health for their information, okay? And as we do, we prepare each one of these, pass them on to the Board of Health.
So do you want a motion?
No, you can just say you concur, unless somebody says, no, we don't want to send it to the Board of Health today. Okay?
I concur.
Okay. We're going to get to designating somebody next. Amy, put your hand up.
For questions? You're open to questions now? Okay. I love how methodical you are and you build a system, and I really appreciate that. I had some question. I wanted to ask for if you could repeat why it is that Magansett is meeting its TMDL approximately, but we still need to do the IAs. And it sounds like that's because though we're meeting the TMDL within, well, I'll let you answer that.
So, if you
I'm
look
going to answer it.
Oh, go ahead.
I touched upon this, Amy. The TMDL is a number that the state has set. This committee is looking at not just the TMDL at one location, we're looking at the sub-embasements, we're looking at the water quality throughout that estuary and what it means to improve the water quality for that estuary. Okay?
So the current monitoring data says that Squatigue is not healthy. And we can't do much for Squatigue, and the commission thinks that there's still a removal from the channel. So that's why those areas were targeted for this. Because although the Sentinel Station is meeting and eelgrass seems to be coming back out in the main harbor, the upper reaches are still not healthy.
Okay, so it's because of fatigue and because of just in general, this county, I'd like to understand better how the county came up with something different from what and I don't need to know that now, but just as far as precedent, if there are two different sets of targets.
Do you want me to invite the county in here to explain why the number's different?
Right. So generally, most of the watersheds are very, very close to the MEP numbers in the county database. Some of it is because they're using updated land use. So when they built their database, there could have been additional growth, significant growth from the time of the MEP, and there could have been changes in land use. And I know I talked with the commission once upon a time, and they calculate the loading slightly different from the MEP, but they also didn't tell me specifically. But I have their sheets of where they think all the nitrogen's coming from, parcel by parcel. So you could sit there and you could calculate it. As I said at the start, Megance's clean, but it wasn't a clean one to do because of those differences. But for most of the other ones, it's very, very close. So.
Royal Megancet?
Yes.
Is in it.
And do they just have standards Title V?
Yes.
I believe so.
Yes.
Scott.
They don't have an IA?
They do not.
No.
Treatment plan, okay.
But they are in the.
They are in the zone. Yep. Okay.
That's them right there.
Another question on the quality, on the difference between the MEP and the county assessment. Are they, the health criteria, apart from the loading criteria, the health criteria, is that a concentration at Sentinel Station, or how do they?
So the health criteria is Buzzards Bay Coalition. That's their Bay Health Index, and they're looking at the DO, they're looking at clarity, they're pulling. And that's another, I don't know how they're weighting.
But it's different than the MEP criteria.
Yes.
Yep.
Very, yeah.
Yes.
So that might be another reason.
Okay.
So.
Are there other comments from the audience? Only because I'm working against our 6:30 get out of jail free time, but we good? Okay.
Send these guys to jail.
So, I'm back up. So this is a little presentation to try to get a recommendation from this committee relative to the Saxon development. Everybody's aware of it, but very quick background. The issue here is who has jurisdiction over the on-site wastewater treatment that this development is going to require. Simple math here, I could have gotten different numbers, but there's over 300 proposed units at present. Each unit is going to have at least one bedroom. DEP Title V says you have to design for 110 gallons per day per bedroom. Anybody wants to follow my math, that's a minimum of 33,000 gallons per day that this development's going to produce. Flows greater than 10,000 gallons per day are reviewed and permitted by the DEP. The local Board of Health does not have oversight directly of that process. So this facility will require a groundwater discharge permit from the DEP. This development is located in a DEP-designated nitrogen-sensitive area. And the criteria governing the Saxon wastewater treatment plant include 310 CMR Section 15, which is Title V, which is the standard requirements for the siting, construction, inspection, upgrade, and expansion of on-site sewage treatment and disposal. Title V's fundamental reason for existing and for being is to protect public health via the proper design and operation of wastewater systems. Title V also defines the nitrogen-sensitive areas now through the revisions over the last year to it. Flows greater than 10,000 gallons per day require a groundwater discharge permit. The permit is issued for and is valid for 5 years and has to be renewed. Within that updated Title V, there's a criteria set for best available nitrogen-reducing technology to reduce nitrogen loading in the nitrogen-sensitive areas. There is an established precedent for best available nitrogen-reducing technology at a wastewater facility with a groundwater discharge permit. The town of Falmouth has 2 wastewater treatment plants. One of them, our larger of the 2, the one in West Falmouth, has a discharge permit with a total nitrogen limit of 3 milligrams per liter. And they achieve that limit, so it is not a technically infeasible limit to impose. And I would propose that the Saxon wastewater treatment plant should be similarly permitted by the DEP when they get around to permitting it for a total nitrogen limit of 3 milligrams per liter. The limit is achievable and will minimize the development's impact to the Great Pond NSA area. I'm proposing a motion that says the Water Quality Management Committee advises the Selectmen, the Board of Health, and the Zoning Board of Appeals to notify the Department of Environmental Protection of the town's expectation that a groundwater discharge permit issued to Saxon Development will be based on installation of a wastewater system that will reliably and consistently achieve a total nitrogen concentration of 3 milligrams per liter or less to achieve the purpose and intent of both 310 CMR, Chapter 15, to protect public health, and 314 CMR, Chapter 21, to manage nitrogen discharges to the groundwater in nitrogen-sensitive areas.
I move that we approve the motion.
Motion made.
I have a technical question. If they did put in the system, would we still have the expectation that they would provide service to some surrounding residences?
They've said a number of things.
Right.
The ZBA last night was, I think, closed the hearing and will make a record decision. They've been not as definitive about wastewater as they need to be.
Right.
And I don't want this horse to get out of the barn. I think we're at the point where we have to say, this is our, you know, if they want to come up with a different plan down the road, they can, but right now, I think we need to take a position that their system will make 3 milligrams per liter.
Right, but our thought is if it makes 3, do we still have the expectation that they would provide some adjacent service or not?
I have no expectation of them providing adjacent.
Okay.
I don't know that, I don't know procedurally, administratively, any way that occurs or can be done right now.
Yep, okay.
Well, I sort of have a similar question, which is, obviously they're building at much higher density than would be normally permittable. And, my impression was that the goal was to limit any increases by sewering beyond just this development, to remediate the nitrogen so that it basically came within conformance of what the permittable densities would have been.
Oh, that's fascinating, because what you're essentially saying is that the standard really should be milligrams per acre.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Has anybody
Well,
ever thought of that before?
A loading limit, yeah. The load should not be increased beyond what would have been the permittable load. But, I mean, in the interest of moving this forward, because I think Steve's right, we need to, this is urgent and should be and this is probably language that DEP will grasp, maybe we should just go with this, but.
I mean, this is our board suggesting that these other boards that can issue a letter to the DEP, because we don't have the authority to do such a thing, that they put out a letter, utilize some of this language, so the DEP is very aware of our concerns and our expectations. Saxon walks in with a different plan and meets the same end-of-the-day criteria, DEP can consider that.
Yeah.
Steve, I'll move that we endorse the motion as presented.
Can I just ask one question quickly?
Let me do this. Motion's been made and seconded, and I'm going to now open up to discussion.
Will this then rule out the use of sort of a clustered IA approach for this facility? Because it's going to be really difficult to probably meet the 3 milligram per liter threshold, which I don't think any of the systems that are being explored today get that low on a consistent basis.
They're gonna have to have an on-site wastewater.
They're going to have to build a small treatment plant,
Yeah.
okay?
A higher volume throughput.
Yeah.
The neighbors won't be unhappy if they can't meet this.
I'm not, that's not my intent.
That's not
My
our
intent
job.
is to limit the amount of nitrogen going into the Coonamessett watershed.
Yeah.
The town runs a wastewater plant, and reliably it runs at 3. It's got components, and it reliably runs at 3. So it can be done.
Steve, can I ask a question out of ignorance? Has this development been proposed as a 40B or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it is a 40.
Yes, yes.
But
But
that's why this is good, because this is a state regulation, and 40Bs still have to meet state requirements.
And 40Bs have to comply with public health. And Title V is predicated on preserving public health. Motion's been, go ahead, Ed.
All right, I would suggest we consider, I think it's an excellent motion, and I think it's a much-needed action, just to go on record. It's out of town's hands. It's purely becomes a DEP decision. They will get the application for groundwater discharge and review it appropriately, hopefully. But having our input, or the input of the town of Falmouth via its regulatory boards and authority, is important. And I would say, in considering what Tom mentioned, consider putting a little more to this, or, you know, A, B, C, that whereas it's a nitrogen-sensitive zone already, and the town is spending millions to ameliorate that situation and meet the TMDLs, the amount of nitrogen added by this system, whether it's 3, 8, 10, or 19 milligrams per liter, that mass of nitrogen that this will discharge should be offset by them being required to allow interested homes in the watershed to connect to their plant with the appropriate who pays for a main and what kind of user fee the homeowners would be required to pay to utilize this plant, but to offset the mass of nitrogen this will produce at whatever level they come up with, do the extension. If it ends up at 10, bang, you got to allow that many. And my point C would be request that the DEP mandate a thorough hydrology study of the impact of that additional 33,000 plus gallons a day into the groundwater, and the impact of the clear cutting, all the trees that were there are not going to remove the water. Now, wait, I'm almost done.
You're getting into ZBA stuff that's
No,
outside the purview of this board.
I think the DEP should require a hydrology study, because here's what's going to happen.
They will. That's
Well-
part of getting the groundwater discharge permit.
Because it's that, plus everything else that is part of the development, that I would feel pretty confident, and Jonathan could probably do the analysis with his experience, what that groundwater level change will do to the adjacent septic systems, creating a public health problem. But anyway, I know it's kind of involved, but I would like to go a little bit further than the motion as proposed and seconded.
I think your points are all sort of valid, but expose more of you to legal attacks. What Steve has up here is so simple, is so DEP, is so cast iron solid.
I mean,
Why put up additional targets to get shot at when you could have another motion to do all this other stuff, but leave this one pristine?
there's a record of decision that's going to be forthcoming from the ZBA. My intent with this motion is to have this sit on top of the record of decision from the ZBA, put the DEP on notice that we want the 3, and let them say why we're not going to get the 3, or what Saxon's going to do to get to the same effect of the 3. Okay?
I mean, I think there are some very simple wording changes. We can't do them now here, but that could allude to the fact that we want to, because it's a nitrogen-sensitive area, we want them to achieve 3 and maintain the load within, you know, what is reasonable for this nitrogen-sensitive area. I mean, we could, given the, you know, the existing density limitations.
But we don't have the legal standing for that. This stands on its own. It's,
Well, that's the question, is
beautifully
does,
strong.
when you say that DEP has designated this as a nitrogen-sensitive area, what does that legally allow either us or them to do?
We'll find out.
Yeah.
I think they have to, I want them to require 3. They required the town of Falmouth to do 3 because they felt that nitrogen was going to harm West Falmouth Harbor. Okay?
Because, you know, I could see you adding wording and incorporate such additional sources, end sources as necessary to control the load appropriately, or something like that.
Mitigate the load that they are going to provide.
You know,
Again, I'm waiting for the record decision out of the ZBA.
Yeah.
Okay? Because they've got a lot of other elements in there. Okay?
Right.
But they're a little bit restricted about what they can say about wastewater because it's over the 10,000 and it's going to go to the DEP.
Right.
Okay?
But the 3 milligram per liter says nothing about the loading, you know, and that's even at
Yeah,
3.
I don't know that there's a system, I don't know that you can get a system that will reliably make lower than 3.
No, you don't. But the question is, if you're just hooking 300 homes up, you're still going to get 3 milligrams per liter.
Saxon could walk in there and say they want to put in cluster IAs and be operating at 18 milligrams per liter, and they would meet some rubric that they might have. So this is telling them, town's not going to be happy with that. DEP, do your job, get them down to the 3.
The,
Only point being that you really probably ought to be bringing in an extra 100 homes or something, you know, some number.
To mitigate that amount you're
When
putting in.
we get around to drawing geo-boundaries, we're probably going to have more homes because of the impact of Saxon.
So, you know, there could be something in here about sizing the waste treatment plant so that it could, you know, include enough additional homes to.
We don't have
control
to, we
load.
don't have to vote on this one. We could table this motion and,
I'm just saying, I
Well,
think
give
we
you a
could
copy.
work on it just a little bit more.
I'll get you a copy of it. We'll table, I would be more than willing to table this. I'll get you a copy, you rework this and bring it back to the next board meeting, next committee meeting.
Okay. I think it's worth considering.
You have to
I
vote
get
on
your,
table.
I get your point about this is simple, ironclad, blah, 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 but it doesn't address the extra load
I know that doesn't, I know it doesn't.
that, what do you have, 40 homes versus 300?
I got that. But 40 homes could go in right now and be at 19,
That's true.
okay? Amy had her hand up. I see you down there. Amy had her hand up,
I,
okay?
oh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're up, Amy.
you're,
My only point was it's really what Steve said, which is that the standard permit that the DEP would issue would be 10 milligrams per liter. So Steve is proposing something lower than that. And the DEP does not generally govern these other things. So this is a request of the DEP, and what you're suggesting is beyond what the DEP would likely do.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to go to Tom and then I'll get to you, Matt.
well, that's a very good point, Amy, that certainly I was not aware of at all, because certainly 3 is a goal. I was going to suggest that we not table the motion, and following Steve Layton's logic and everything, I think we should, in the interest of getting this done with, we should endorse this motion as presented, knowing that it doesn't close the door on our thoughts on this project, and we would have this marked off as a starting point for how we feel about the project, and then certainly as we can come back to the next meeting and embroider it or whatever else needs to be done here. So I would like to have my motion considered.
Okay. All right.
You have to vote to table.
No, nobody's, I haven't quite made a formal, I said I would table it if people wanted me to, but I didn't make a motion to table it. Matt, you're up.
Matt Hanley, West Falmouth. I actually attended all those ZBA meetings, majority of them. I didn't make all the meetings. And I did bring up wastewater. You know, Amy did come and speak. But Saxton wasn't very, they were holding their cards tight to their chest. And one of the things that wasn't discussed, which would have derailed that project, is wastewater and its impact on the immediate Coonamessett River project and that watershed. And one of the things, I really appreciate this. I think this is something that needs to be done. But in addition to that, I think we should hold Saxton to the standards that Falmouth is being held to. Mass DEP, you know, made Falmouth do a nitrogen offset plan where Falmouth had to, you know, compensate, you know, so subsidies in that watershed. So, because what Saxton's going to do is say that it's unrealistic for them to get to 3 parts per million because of the size of the facility, and they're going to ask for a waiver or some kind of consideration, and that they're going to want to go to 10. But the town of Falmouth, the taxpayer of this town, and all the homeowners in that watershed under this TASA project are going to be paying to upgrade to take that nitrogen out. And this 300 units is going to be undoing what the town of Falmouth is doing. So why should the taxpayers of Falmouth have to sewer another 300 homes? I'm just using that as a number. I know these are bedrooms, and that's not the way you calculate it. But we would have to do additional sewering just to make up for that difference between 3 parts per million and 10 parts per million. Saxton should be able to, should have to compensate for that difference and we should put that in the language, because I've been at the meetings and they try to use every legal loophole they can to get out of this project as cheap as they can. And they're going to, once this is out of the town of Falmouth and it goes to the state, you're not going to have public hearings like they did with the ZBA. The public had a huge influence on that project with the setbacks and the design and a lot of the drainage and stuff like that. So, you know, we need to have representation at these state level hearings, and this document is going to do that. But we should make the document clear as we can so they can't dance around it. So if they can't meet the three parts per million, which is going to be very difficult for the size of their plant, which was stated by Amy, you know, at the ZBA meetings, then we should say, if you can't meet it, then you have to do a nitrogen offset plan to subsidize other homes in your area to go to IA systems or to be sewered.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so there's a motion that's been made and seconded. We'll call the question. All those in favor of this recommendation, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I'm opposed because I think we should wait 2 weeks and see if we can't make it stronger.
Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ayes and 1 nay.
All right.
Thank you. All right, in the interest of time, because we only got 9 minutes left or so here, I'm going to look for my agenda again. We need to designate, I would like to figure out how to designate a representative from this board to communicate with the Board of Health regularly on the geozone issues, as well as somebody for the Freshwater Pond Advisory. You've expressed an interest, John, in doing the Board of Health?
Be happy to do that.
Okay. I would nominate John for the Board of Health. Anybody, any other nominations?
No, didn't we already vote that?
No, we haven't voted it. We talked about him covering, but we haven't voted it.
He's the guy.
All right, all those in favor of John going to the Board of Health, which is down
Aye.
at Civil Defense Room, John, if you can find it. Okay, I don't know that we have, if nobody stepped forward for the freshwater pond yet. Have they?
Tom did.
Tom, did you?
I could and do it. I'm very interested
Are
in
you
what's
comfortable
going
with that?
on there.
Are you comfortable with that? Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, if they'll accept me. I
Yeah.
don't know. I see Kim.
We would love it.
So,
Okay. As long as we don't tell her
nominate
why.
Tom. All those in favor of Tom being our representative of the Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, it's a lifetime appointee.
Don't get fresh with me, Steve.
All right.
Freshwater joke?
Yes.
I'm going to skip over reports of members in committee in the interest of time and cover the minutes. Okay? I've read them. I have no further comments. Anybody else?
I have two really minor things that I'll go over with Kristen. Nothing of substance. Just
Okay.
very simple things.
They were very good and thorough,
Can I get
and
a
very
motion?
long,
I
because there was
move
a
that
lot
we,
going on.
Can we get a motion to accept the minutes as
Accept
written with
as
the-
written,
with
yeah.
the small corrections? You going to second your corrections, Tom?
Sure, I'll second.
You know, you might-
What were your
let the guy
corrections?
do
They're
one
minor.
second. Let him get his name into the minutes.
I second it.
Seconded, there we go, Jonathan seconded. All those in favor of accepting the minutes, signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, next meetings are,
July 10.
July 10th and the
24th.
10th and 24th, okay? We have a couple of minutes left here, if there's a,
Couple things brewing under reports from staff or
Go ahead.
members or whatever.
Yep.
Ken and I are meeting tomorrow afternoon with a PhD student from UMass who's in some sort of collaborative project. I don't know all the details of it, with the Oceanographic, Buzzards Bay Coalition, and the Woodwell Center. And they're got a much larger, her part of it is to look at how, at least as she's expressed it to us so far, to look at how officials in towns are using the new data that can be collected. She's very interested in new data technology for information. And anyway, we've got a brief meeting with her
In
tomorrow
any
afternoon.
field? New data on what?
On water quality, I think.
I don't know, we'll find out when we.
We'll know more tomorrow. I did present last week, Chuck Martinson and I presented our paper, and I had come up with some new refined numbers that in a future meeting, maybe as soon as 2 weeks, I'd like to sort of represent the refined thing. And
didn't put them on the agenda.
yeah, I'll speak to Kristen about that. And I'll express my utter frustration at DEP's performance at the Cape Coastal. I had argued for 2 months, build up to this meeting, was to have state people there that would tell us what they wanted. I had even titled the panel discussion assessment, progress assessment, what do we know? And they came and presented Septic 101, freshman introductory lecture on how septic systems work. And
There you go.
it was, well, John, you sat in on that, yeah. I was very disappointed, but
Sorry to hear that.
whatever it was happened. And that's all I have to say about that stuff.
I'm going to do a 30-second update on outfall stuff. Amy can
Yes.
correct me when I misstate something, but GHD, Amy, and all the folks that are involved have been actively corresponding with both the USGS, that's moving along, the DEP, that's moving along, Army Corps of Engineer, that's moving along. And at this moment in time, or shortly, we're going to be, again, back on the water, gathering some baseline data for this season. So if you see a boat out there transecting off of the heights, it's part of our project. No shocks, no surprises over the last few weeks. People are engaged from the regulatory side. Nobody's thrown up a roadblock yet. They've asked for some more information, but steady progress, not slow progress, steady progress. So, right? With that, unless somebody else has got another committee report you sort of covered earlier.
Yeah.
I might just say I preempted my appointment and attended the Board of Health meeting Monday night.
Yeah.
We started chatting, and they're planning to send a representative here to our meetings when we're discussing what we've discussed today.
Terrific. Okay. We've got 4 more minutes. Anybody have any items of concern, information? Items we should be taking up that we haven't taken up? With that, anybody want to make, I'm looking right at Jonathan. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
This could be your first
I make a
official motion.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
Made and seconded. No, this is a motion that does not allow for any discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Well done.